Dismissive communication doesn't always sound harsh. Sometimes it sounds normal. It sounds like a regular conversation. It sounds like two people just talking, going back and forth, sharing opinions, expressing different views. And from the outside, nothing about it looks wrong. Nothing about it would immediately stand out. Nothing about it would make someone say, that was a problem. But there's a moment where something shifts, and it's not always what was said, it's how it landed. Because words by themselves don't always carry the full impact. Tone carries impact. Energy carries impact. The way something is delivered carries impact. Because you can disagree with someone without making them feel small. You can have a different perspective without making the other person feel like they're wrong for thinking the way they do. You can respond without shutting someone down. And when that line gets crossed, something changes. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way that stops the conversation right there, but quietly. Because now it's not just a disagreement anymore. It's how the person felt while being disagreed with. It's how it landed inside of them. It's the feeling that came with the words. Because sometimes what someone remembers most is not what was said, it's how they felt in that moment. Did they feel heard? Did they feel respected? Did they feel safe to express themselves? Or did they feel corrected, dismissed, minimized, made to feel like what they said didn't carry weight? And that feeling is what stays long after the conversation is over, long after the words are forgotten. Because people may forget the exact sentence, but they remember how it made them feel. And that's where the shift begins. When someone feels dismissed, they don't always argue. They don't always respond. They don't always defend themselves. Sometimes they just go quiet. And that silence is often misunderstood because from the outside, it can look like they don't have anything to say, or like they agreed, or like the conversation is over. But that's not always what's happening. A lot of times, they're processing the feeling because it's not about winning the conversation. It's about how they were made to feel inside of it. And when someone feels dismissed, something shifts internally. They start paying attention differently. They start noticing how often it happens. They start feeling the pattern, even if they never say it out loud. Because you can say the right words with the wrong tone, and it lands differently. You can be technically correct and still be emotionally dismissive. You can have a valid point and still make the other person feel small while expressing it. And when that happens repeatedly, it doesn't just stay in that one moment. It builds because now the person is not just responding to what's being said right now. They're responding to how it has felt over time. And when someone starts feeling like every time they speak, they have to defend themselves or explain themselves or justify themselves, they start holding back. Not because they don't have thoughts, not because they don't care, but because speaking no longer feels safe the same way. And this is where the relationship starts changing, even if nobody has said it out loud yet. Because now, before they speak, they think about how it's going to be received. They think about whether it's worth saying. They think about whether it's going to turn into something that makes them feel the same way again. And when someone starts thinking like that, their communication begins to shift. They may shorten what they say. They may leave things out. They may choose silence instead of risking that feeling again. And that's how communication starts to change. Not all at once, but over time, quietly. And this is where it matters. Because when someone starts feeling dismissed, they don't always leave. They don't always argue. They don't always make a big scene. Sometimes they just stop bringing things up. They stop sharing small thoughts. They stop mentioning things that matter to them. They stop opening conversations that feel unnecessary. They stop expressing things that once came naturally. Not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped feeling heard. And that's a different kind of shift. Because now you still have communication, but it's not the same communication. It's more surface, more limited, more controlled. And over time, that changes the connection. Because communication isn't just about talking. It's about how safe someone feels while they're talking. It's about whether they feel respected in the moment. It's about whether they feel like what they're saying actually matters. Because when someone feels safe, they speak freely. They share openly. They bring things up without hesitation. But when that safety changes, so does their willingness to show up in that way. And the relationship feels that. Because now, you're not getting the same openness. You're not getting the same honesty. You're not getting the same level of connection. Not because the person doesn't have it, but because they're no longer giving it the same way. And that creates distance. Not loud distance, not obvious distance, but emotional distance. The kind that shows up in how conversations feel, and how much is shared, and how much is left unsaid. And that's where people often get confused, because they'll say, we still talk, we still communicate, but it doesn't feel the same. And the reason it doesn't feel the same is because something changed in how safe it feels to speak. And that matters more than most people realize. Because connection is built in those small moments, those everyday conversations, those little exchanges. And when those moments start feeling different, the relationship starts feeling different too. Now, if you've ever felt like you had to think twice before speaking, this is what that usually comes from. Not one big moment, but repeated moments where something didn't land the way it needed to. Because sometimes protecting the relationship is not about being right. It's not about proving a point. It's not about correcting everything that's said. Sometimes it's about making sure the other person never feels small for speaking, never feels dismissed for expressing themselves, never feels like they have to defend every thought they have. Because you don't have to agree with someone to respect how they feel. You don't have to see it their way to make sure they feel heard while explaining it. You don't have to change your perspective to protect how the conversation feels. And that's where maturity shows up. Not in always being right, but in knowing how to disagree without disconnecting. Knowing how to respond without shutting someone down, knowing how to hold your position without making the other person feel like theirs doesn't matter. Because long relationships are not built on perfect communication. They're built on safe communication. They're built on making sure that even in disagreement, respect stays in place. That even in difference, connection is protected. Because once someone starts feeling like their voice doesn't matter the same way, they stop using it the same way. And once that happens, the relationship begins to change quietly. So sometimes protecting the relationship is not about saying more. It's about being aware of how what you say is being felt. Because what people feel in conversation is what determines whether they stay open or slowly start pulling back. And that is where everything either stays connected or begins to shift.